have my first session, the first unit, the introductory session, the first unit, Daniel's second unit, and this. And so this, the whole, just to reinforce what is distinctive about this program, it's really trying to cultivate in a very fractured, contentious world, the art of trying to get outside of your own way of thinking and understand that there really might, there could be legitimately several perspectives to a complicated argument. And it's not that somebody's just, greedy or fearful or whatever, or has an ulterior motive, but really may have a legitimate, concern. I'm just letting somebody else in the room. So what we're talking about today is when somebody is resentful of the other in their community, is it xenophobia? Or could it be perhaps an issue of national security? So this is titled From Pharaoh and the Israelites Through Japanese Internment to Today. And the question, and can you all see my screen? Can I have a thumbs up or whatever? Everybody can see my screen? Okay, great. When is fearing minorities that, and when is it that question? So we're going to begin with a text that I'm going to enlarge for us right now, and I'm going to look for some readers. Ria, since you have to go, and we're not going to study in Hebrew, we're going to do all this out loud, and I'll just ask for some feedback. But Ria, why don't you start with the JPS translation of Exodus 1:8-12?
A new king arose. Wait a second, let me just fix this. A new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph, and he said to his people, "Look, the Israelite people are much too numerous for us. Let us deal shrewdly with them so that they may not increase. Otherwise, in the event of war, they may join our enemies in fighting against us and rise from the land." So they set taskmasters over them to oppress them with forced labor, and they built garrison cities for Pharaoh, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they were oppressed, the more they increased and spread out, so that the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites. Sounds familiar.
It does. And, it's been such a poignant passage for now so many years, certainly since the 1930s. Look for a moment, if you will, at the difference between how the Jewish Publication Society translates verses 9 and 10 versus the Art Scroll, which tends to have a little bit of a bent and sometimes is slightly more literal. Whereas this one says, look, the Israelite people are much too numerous for us. Let us deal shrewdly with them so that they may not increase. They say, behold, the people, the children of Israel are more numerous and stronger than we. It's added, and we can look at the, okay, so, and actually it's more literal. It says, this is more literal. It says, Vayomer el amo, hine, am b'nei Yisrael, behold these people Israel, Rav ve'atzum mimenu, bigger and stronger than we. So this, okay, just want to say, okay, come let us outsmart it, the people, lest it, not they, also interesting, become numerous, and it, the people, may be that if a war will incur, it, again, dehumanizing them too, may join our enemies and wage war against us and go up from the land. Okay, just wanted to focus on that. So next page. Okay, so the question is, and this program, you're looking at the slides prepared by Pardes for this, and also maybe for a slightly younger audience sometimes. But what they want us to do, just think about that story and it doesn't say, by the way, here are the things it doesn't say. Well, let me ask you, what doesn't it say in there? Why do you think Pharaoh might have done that?
What it doesn't say, what it doesn't.
What doesn't it say? Does it say there was a rebellion?
It's just it. You know what? It's like the welfare mothers. They become this glob, and it doesn't say anything about who they are, where they came from, anything. There's no human aspect to talking about them. So from the it to this numerous glob of people, and I don't know if that's what you meant about what it doesn't say.
Right. That's really important. I mean, it's lumped Israelites together. That's number one. Jack?
Well, I was just going to say, it's curious. It doesn't say that they'll overthrow us. It says they'll leave, implying that they're serving a purpose. And the worry is that they won't be available to serve that purpose anymore.
Right. And brilliant. And if you were that worried that they're going to kick your butt, let them go. Who cares? Right. I mean, like, say, good riddance, arrivederci. I mean, do you know what I mean? On some level, like encourage them to leave, but that's not what happens here. And we're going to look at some commentaries, a couple different commentaries that sort of highlight two different ways of understanding this. There's a lot of reading, so you're all going to get a lot of great chance to read. Let me make this bigger.
If I can just jump in for 1 second, because you obviously are having us think about contemporary situations as well. It's not a replacement theory type issue. It's not that they're going to take our place. It's that they'll leave, which is quite odd, really.
Right. Exactly. And again, we could think about, you know, I mean, even if we think about just sort of the immigrant situation in this country, you know, I mean, there are many different rhetorical patterns. Some suggest, you know,
who's going to do all the work that the immigrants do in this country?
And if yeah, go ahead, Sylvia.
I was thinking that too, and I was thinking about the migrant workers in the 60s and 70s when they started to organize because of the horrible conditions. And what was that about? And why, you know, people kept saying that we needed them for the work, and we did. But the question was, what were we doing with them besides making them into basically slaves, and dehumanizing them?
Thank you. Well, there you go. And I mean, there's, you know, that's why the Torah is so fascinating endlessly. So Rosalie, I want you to read, I hope you can see it, it's big enough for you. This is from a modern commentary from the Anchor Bible on Exodus. This is Professor William Propp. This is the redone Anchor Bible. And so this is the new king. So the question is, what's new about the king? And how is it that he didn't remember Joseph? And what happened to the old king? And why did the old king remember Joseph? So he's trying to look into just that word, the new king. There you go.
And why is he called king?
Because it was a new pharaoh.
It was a new pharaoh. Okay,
yeah.
Okay. There arose a king that did not know Joseph, would have sufficed. Why a new king? Many speculate that the new king has founded a new dynasty. For example, Josephus, so-and-so, and whatever, 2000.
Yeah, Joseph,
okay.
In his book Antiquities, like he was
Antiquities.
The first to
A more conservative interpretation would be that the new king, like the new wife of Deuteronomy 24:5, has not been king for very long. His headstrong action would exemplify the folly of youth upon attaining power. This might refer to the king's advisors, or perhaps to the entire people. In any case, Pharaoh is not the only culprit. All Egypt is implicated in the oppression of Israel, as is clear from the plurals in 1:11 through 14. People of Israel's sons. There may be, moreover, an effort to balance the people of Israel against Amo.
Pharaoh's.
Amo.
Yeah.
That's Latin.
No, Shelo, his people, Pharaoh's people. So we're looking the people of Israel versus Pharaoh's people. Now they've become opposing entities. To emphasize
that the conflict is between two sovereign nations, greater and mightier than us. Thus, 1:9 makes the historically preposterous claim that the Israelites became more powerful than the Egyptians. Pharaoh's paranoia is ludicrous, yet sinister. Demagogues often credit weak minorities with vast powers. Elsewhere, the Bible depicts the Egyptian ruling class as obsessively xenophobic in all those instances.
Yes.
Egyptian sources attest to their tight control on immigration and emigration. Go up from the land. We might expect the Egyptians to fear that Israel would conquer the land, but I am not sure we can or should rationalize Pharaoh's concerns.
Okay, thank you. So I have to imagine that some of you have thoughts on this. I certainly had many. What strikes you? I'll let me point out a few things just to share. That first of all, Prop is pointing out that Pharaoh is making the Israelites, who are a minority living in his region, to be like their own individual people with their own individual army, which they're not, and they don't have. They're residents in his country. Actually, probably if they're being fruitful and multiplying, they're doing well and enjoying their life, right? So, and there's so many times in world history that we can think about Jewish communities when they had a little bit of comfort and security, thrived and contributed to the community, only to become a threat, not militarily, but in the eyes of the leader. So I want to hear what everybody has to say. Thank you. Let's start with Sylvia, Ria, and then Sheila.
Just thinking about how this plays out again and again in history. In the mid to end of the 11th century, when the Jews in northern France were very prosperous and tolerated. And then when somebody new came in, they were persecuted again. 19th century Enlightenment, and they were persecuted again. Why is a question, but it seems to me that a lot of the answer to that question is, it happened in England too, and that it's not just that they became prosperous, but that the new king became, or the new rulers or whatever, became more paranoid because they didn't know what they had. They didn't know who they were. They didn't know what they had, but they wanted to make sure their power was consolidated so they could make up things. It's like 45 saying that all the immigrants are not just nice people, they're all criminals. Why? Because they want to consolidate their power. That's where I see that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia. Ria?
Okay, so from I was just thinking Marjorie Taylor Greene, that the Jews are with the lasers attacking the power that we have, and then there's the concept of the dual loyalty. Are the Jews are they more loyal? I mean, this is an argument also, or a smear about the Catholics as well, that are you going to be loyal to Israel and not to the United States? And a good example is also in the during the Soviet Union era, the refuseniks, the Jews who they were being oppressed and oppressed, set apart, had a special ID card, which meant that they really weren't citizens of the Soviet Union.
Right.
And if they asked to leave, which was, of course, who's going to want to stay around in those conditions and go to Israel, then they lost their jobs. They couldn't participate in any public kind of things. And the fear was that they would end up in the gulag. So it's not just one country or one system that does this. And we happen to be on the wrong end of many of this type of thing. But it goes against other groups of people that are viewed as alien, that you can blame for everything that goes wrong with your own personal life. And I'm sure there are a lot of other examples, but those three can't come up in my mind.
Right. And that's what's so fantastic about this curriculum. And at some point, the next thing we're going to look at after we hear from Sheila and Jack is a kind of an opposite way of understanding. There have been times in history where leaders, oh my God, my cat is whatever, where leaders have literally, like there have been residents in the country who really were aligned with another nation and internally setting up opportunities to overthrow it. So it's not like this is where the Pardes curriculum of could there be an instance of this kind of paranoia about another that might be a legitimate concern about national security? Absolutely. It has happened throughout history. Is this that example? Separate issue. We don't, but so we'll look at that in a second. So after Sheila and Jack, I hope Rhea and Rosalie can stay just till we get through the next source. Go ahead, Sheila.
Thank you. I'm very curious about this. When Sylvia said the word, they tolerate us. Do we want to be a people who are just merely tolerated? Tolerance was a really big word in the 80s and 90s, but it's not thrown around so much anymore because of the implication. And, Rabbi, you've said several times, like really emphatically, it's not about power and might and military. And yet here where it says, demagogues often credit weak minorities with vast powers. Well, Israel is not weak anymore, right? We are powerful. We have a strong army. And I'm wondering, is this like the basis of why there can never be a two-state solution? Because at best, all we can do is tolerate each other. And at worst, both have mighty, the power and military to cause a lot of destruction. Is there any connection there at all?
Well, in terms of relating this to modern times and the lens through which Israel has its challenges now, no. Not no. If you look at Israel as Pharaoh and the Palestinians as the Israelites, are they going to rise against us? That would be an interesting, and in some, they've tried in some instances. For however you think about why they've done that, it's a very interesting comparison. And if you look at that, you can see how some Jewish people through a very progressive lens could see us as the aggressors. You could see that. Not many of us don't see that, but that's a possibility. Jack, did you want to share a thought?
I was just going to let you go on to the next text. I can hold my thought.
Okay, great. Well, actually, why don't you read for this? This is from So this is from the Book of Jubilees. This is it's long but really interesting. We'll try to get through as much as we can, and look at this view of Pharaoh through a slightly more compassionate lens.
And he, Joseph, commanded the people of the children of Israel before he died to carry his bones at the time when they would go out of the land of Egypt. And he made them swear an oath concerning his bones, because he knew that Egypt would not again bring them forth and bury them in the land of Canaan, because when Maron, the king of Canaan, was dwelling in the land of Ashur, he fought in the valley with the king of Egypt. and he killed
so-
him there.
Right. So I just want you to know, this is setting up the relationship between Pharaoh and the Israelites living in his region, not as Pharaoh and the Israelites, but Israelites as an extension of the Canaanites. The Canaanites, we'd be like a subgroup of the Canaanites, like the Southerners in America, right? We are a subgroup. We're not Israelites, Jews. It's different. And the Canaanites have often warred with Egypt. Here, keep going.
And he pursued after the Egyptians as far as the gates of Ermon. And he was unable to enter because another new king ruled Egypt, and he was stronger than he. And he returned to the land of Canaan, and the gates of Egypt were shut up, and there was none who could leave or enter Egypt. And Joseph died in this 46th Jubilee, in the 6th week, in the 2nd year, and they buried him in the land of Egypt. And all of his brothers died after him. And the king of Egypt went forth to fight with the king of Canaan in this 47th Jubilee, in the 2nd week, in the 2nd year. And the children of Israel brought forth the bones of the children of Jacob, all except the bones of Joseph. And they buried them in the field, in the cave of Machpelah, in the mountain. And many returned into Egypt, but a few of them were left in Mount Hebron. And Amram, your father, was left with them. And the king of Canaan was victorious over the king of Egypt, and he closed the gates of Egypt. And he, the king of Egypt, conceived an evil thought against the children of Israel, so that he might cause them to suffer. And he said to the men of Egypt, behold, the people of the sons of Israel have grown and increased more than we. Come, let us act wisely concerning them before they increase, and let us cause them to suffer in slavery before war comes to us, and before they battle with us. Or if not that, then they will mix with our enemy, and they will depart from our land, because their hearts and their faces are upon the land of Canaan. And they appointed over them taskmasters to make them suffer in slavery, and they built strengthened cities for Pharaoh, Pithom and Ramses. And they built all of the walls and all of the ramparts which had fallen in the cities of Egypt. And they made them slaves by force. And the men of Egypt regarded the sons of Israel as
So, Jack, I want to hear what you were going to say, but what to me was so fascinating about this is that I would never have thought to look at Pharaoh's worry as a military thing, as a military concern, and aligning this growing population of Israelites is really a subset of the much more aggressive warring Canaanites. And I'd love to know some thoughts you have, but Jack, I want to hear what you were going to say first, and then a few other comments.
Sure, thank you. I was going to say, we're familiar with anti-Semitism existing in countries that have no Jews. So I think some of this is posturing on the part of demagogues, if you will, because it's convenient to have people focused on hatred for some minority, which could be a minority of zero, just to avoid losing the support of the people and losing their control and leadership. So I don't even know that it matters if the people are there, as long as the subjects of the ruler believe that there's some enemy. That's to the advantage of the leader.
Absolutely. Ria, thank you, Jack. No question.
This is so interesting, because archaeologists, what is the there's a site that has the Roman in Israel I'm talking about, and it's in the north of, just slightly northeast of Galilee, or the Tiberias, and there's the Roman ruins at one of the levels at the same time that supposedly the Israelites were, or the Hebrews were, slaves. There's an Egyptian police guard place. So the Egyptians were there.
Yep.
That the Israelites were just, and other archaeologists have proposed that the Israelites not leaving Egypt, because if you take Josephus's concept or his report, that there were just a small group, but that the Israelites actually arose out of the Canaanites. They were one of the Canaanite tribes.
Right.
And there's this whole thing around it. So I find this is beyond what we were discussing about what do you do with minorities who exist in your community, blah, blah, blah. But this is so interesting because that the anger of this is the Josephus is adding emotions to it, the anger of the Pharaoh about his position in fighting against the Canaanites, and you have this small group of people and not these hundreds of thousands of people that you're gonna take it out on. And so there's a lot of stuff in here. Oh my goodness.
I know, and we're not even going to scratch the surface. I'm hoping most of you
I-
can stay till about 10:35. I know you guys have to go right now.
This
But
is
listen,
so good. Darn.
watch the rest, and I will send you the source sheets, and you can enjoy. But enjoy your conversation, and I'll look forward to hearing what you learn. But I hope the rest of you will be able to stay. And I'm looking for a reader for
Thank you,
this
Marcia.
commentary on. Did I Oh, I want to say one other thing, you guys. Listen. There's going to be a fascinating speaker in our community on March 8th. If you look at my newsletter, you can see where to RSVP. You were talking about how people, Jack was saying how people don't even know Jewish people are the biggest anti-Semites. I mean, I'm sure there are some people who know Jewish people who are also anti-Semites, but that really, it's sort of the mystery of the other. And Jeff Scoop, I thought it was Shoop, but it's Scoop, who was, a very well-known neo-Nazi who did a lot of horrible stuff, really has, did a 180 and has been working for a number of years with the Museum of Tolerance as a speaker about how he combated his own crazy extremism and how he's working with other people to do the same. And he's going to be speaking. It's a partnership between the Orange County Interfaith Network and the Museum of Tolerance and Orange County Human Relations. We're hosting it at Shir HaMalot. It's a breakfast of all times on Shushan Purim, March 8th. Please make a reservation. It's free, and come hear him. This is so apropos to what we're talking about right now. So I hope you'll join us. But I'm looking for another reader. Sylvia, do you want to read this commentary by Luzzatto Shadal? A new king arose over Egypt?
Sure, thank you, Rabbi. A new king ascended to the throne. According to the opinion of the scholar Yast, the pharaoh that reigned during the period belonged to the Ramses dynasty. The kings from that dynasty had defeated the shepherd kings who had themselves invaded Egypt from the west and had ruled over Egypt for about 2 centuries. He claims that Joseph and the brothers had come to Egypt during the era of these shepherd kings. The close relationship between the kings of that dynasty and Joseph and the Hebrews was due to the fact that both were descendants of Shem and originated in Asia Minor. The Egyptians at that time spoke a language which was similar to ancient Hebrew. It is also possible that the reason they were called Hebrews was that they were descended from Yoktan, the son of Ever, a grandson of Shem, from Genesis, the pharaoh reigning.
Hang on, let me make this bigger. There we go. Hold on, Sylvia. So this is a huge text from Luzzatto. It's so fascinating, though, to me that now he's actually talking about the relationship. Can you read this, Sylvia? I can't make it much bigger.
That's all right, I can see it. Okay. During Joseph's time, was fond of the Hebrews and settled Yaakov's sons in the most fertile part of the country in the province of Goshen, near the province and capital of Ramses.
I want to stop you for a second. So what Luzzatto is saying is he's actually doing diplomatic history. He's taking the text of the Bible where we have sort of a wacky pharaoh who has dreams and seems kind of like almost like an Achashverosh, not quite, but he, doesn't know what he wants. And suddenly, Joseph ascends to the throne, even though he's basically a stranger. He's taking that and he's actually saying, no, we're talking about the history of these ancient peoples. And this Pharaoh had a close relationship with some people who were Hebrews, and he was inclined to be favorable, not only of Joseph, but his whole family. And he gave him great land. Like, we don't think about that in the Torah, and the Torah doesn't actually make that explicit at all. So pick up here. It is most likely, Sylvia.
It is most likely that this whole province was owned by members of one family, Ramses, and that the Israelites took over most of that province and settled there. 200 years later, the members of the Ramses family got involved in a war, rebelling against alien kings from the dynasty of the shepherds, and they defeated them and wiped them out. They took over the whole land of Egypt at about that time. Seeing that the members of the Ramses family were sworn enemies of the Israelites due to having been deprived by them of their ancestral, and plus the fact that the Israelites were so friendly with the old ruling class, the result of all this was the decrees against the Hebrews, 110. Personally, I would say that it is true to say that the new king of Egypt was afraid of a public uprising against him, but was confident, on the other hand, that if such an uprising would materialize and he would kill the leaders of the revolt, the original Egyptian population would be grateful to him for having put down the uprising and having restored law and order in the country. Not only that, but from that point on, the population would be fearful and therefore obedient to him. But he was even more afraid of the Israelites, who, seeing that they were newcomers and relative strangers in the country, did not have firm enough roots to stay in the country if war would break out and all that this entails. Even if the king would prevail in the war or against an internal uprising, he was not confident that he could prevail against the Hebrews. He suspected them of only biding their time before leaving the country en masse. Once having left, they would make common cause with Egypt's enemies. Well, isn't that interesting?
I mean, like, who would have thunk, you know? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I mean, that they're really, that basically what they're saying is that this new president or this new king had no idea of the diplomatic history, had no concept of how it was that they got here, literally the roots were of the Israelites in that region. And he just sort of made some random assumptions because he was young and he was scared and he was naive and maybe a little, xenophobic, whatever. But any thoughts on this before it's just so, I mean, Luzzatto, it's fascinating.
But it was
It always-
go
No,
ahead.
go ahead. I'm going to leave. Go ahead, Sylvia. I'm just going to say it all depends who writes the history.
Hello.
Hello. There you
Hello,
go.
right,
This is fascinating. I'll watch the end. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Rosalie. But what was so interesting about that is, all of that, but also he tapped into something that is endemic to to our history, that we in fact were on our way somewhere. I mean, were we not?
I mean, when you say we were on our way somewhere, meaning what do you mean?
We were not, because Moses hadn't come up to bring us to the promised land, but in our psyche, that's where we're always going to be, is at the promised land. So I think that's really interesting that underneath all of that he tapped into something that we may not have even have been consciously aware of.
Right. So I think, yes, but what he's also doing though is he's actually giving what I feel like just an unusual and comprehensive history of international diplomacy that the Torah cannot and does not address. But I guess it's important, and it's really important for all of us who are interested in this when we read the Torah, particularly if we want to understand it as even a slightly historical document, to be able to have that kind of information about what kings were at war with who at what period and why this might have been included in the first place is quite it's quite eye-opening, at least for me as a theological scholar and not a historian.
I think the last sentence of that text from Luzzatto also tries to address your question, Rabbi, about why not just let them leave, because it says if they leave, then they're going to join forces and come back to take over.
Right. So it's not that they were going to actually have an internal uprising with, munitions and whatnot, but that they would go and come back and, with a much greater army, and then, have its way with Egypt, so to speak.
But doesn't that make sense in a way when you think like the Jews were slaves? That meant we were really strong, right? From all the labor and work and building those pyramids.
Right.
I mean, why wouldn't it make sense that they're afraid of, well, wait a second, we built this people who we fear, but now we've made them physically strong.
Well, that would be really in defense, Sheila, of the idea that you're like looking at this in a way that we wouldn't have thought, because we just basically see them as a lowly slave population. That's sort of the view that we are taught, certainly when we're young, And one more, I just don't want to let this go. So this is another passage from. This is a passage from Josephus, which was referred to in Jubilees. And I would love, Sheila, do you want to read this?
I'm happy to. I'm not sure I see the whole screen.
You don't. And if I make it smaller, I don't know. It might be too small. That's what I'm concerned about.
I think I can do that.
Okay, hang on a second.
Thanks. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
Now it happened that the Egyptians grew delicate and lazy as to painstaking, and gave themselves up to other pleasures, and in particular, the love of gain.
He's saying they were greedy and lazy. That's what Josephus is saying about the Egyptians, greedy and lazy.
Yeah, they also became very ill-affected, is that right? Ill-affected toward the Hebrews, as touched with envy at their prosperity. For when they saw how the nation of Israelites flourished and were become eminent already in plenty of wealth, which they had acquired by their virtue and natural love of labor, they thought their increase was to their own detriment, and having in length of time forgotten the benefits they had received from Joseph, particularly the crown being now come into another family, they became very abusive to the Israelites and contrived many ways of afflicting them. For they enjoined them to cut a great number of channels for the river, and to build walls for their cities and ramparts, that they might restrain the river and hinder its waters from stagnating upon its running over its own banks. They set them also to build pyramids, and by all this wore them out, and forced them to learn all sorts of mechanical arts, and to accustom themselves to hard labor. And 400 years did they spend under these afflictions. For they strove one against the other, which should get the mastery, the Egyptians desiring to destroy the Israelites by these labors, and the Israelites desiring to hold out to the end under them.
What do you think about that? What do you think about Josephus's understanding of this?
Well, I can only relate it to my world of education, and bear with me because I hope there's a connection. So you teach high school, there's maybe 3,500 kids on campus and maybe 120 teachers. It amazes me that the kids never realize who really held the power in numbers on a high school campus. That they even listen to what teachers say, or are willing to be, follow directives, and it's sort of like, when we have that belief that we are lesser, that we are weaker, even though all evidence in numbers and just pure strengths teaches us otherwise, we're still enslaved in our minds about who we are and how we see ourselves.
Very interesting. And also I want to point out this. I mean, it's totally separate. Think about the hardworking immigrants that come to this country. They came with nothing. They worked their butts off. They acquired things. So this is about the Israelites. For when they saw how the Israelites flourished and were already eminent in plenty of wealth, meaning the Israelites had worked hard in Egypt. They built a middle-class lifestyle. They had nice neighborhoods, which they had acquired by their virtue and natural love of labor. They worked. So did the Koreans. So did everybody else. I mean, think about, who came to this country. And they thought that their increase in wealth was to their own detriment, meaning the Egyptians thought that because the Israelites were doing better, that meant that they were doing less well. There was not certainly what we call an abundance mentality, and having in length of time forgotten the benefits that they had received from Joseph. How did this all come? My God, nobody in Egypt would have had anything if Joseph hadn't interpreted Pharaoh's dreams and set this whole thing in motion and, acquired all this land for Pharaoh through. Actually, Joseph wasn't such a hero in that regard, particularly the crown being now into another family who didn't care and didn't really see themselves as invested in Egyptian history. It's like, think about, you'd like to believe that every leader of this country really sees themselves as standing on the shoulders of all the great Americans that stood before them, not for their own gain, but to make sure that America flourishes as the great democracy, model of democracy in the world. Anyway, there's a lot in this Josephus, and that's why I loved it. And what I want to do now, just because there's so much, is I want to bring this. So what Mahloket Matters is doing, again, because we have limited time, we only have about 20 more minutes, tries to do is help us see sort of a more modern example. I want to close between, at about 10:30, maybe 10, talking about what's, the world today. When this curriculum was created, there wasn't the war in Ukraine. There wasn't all the things that are there. A lot of things weren't going on that are going on now. So I'd love for you to think about sort of this, but let's look at this for a moment. This is an article written in 1942 by Walter Lippmann about Japanese internment. So, okay, who wants to read? And I'll just sort of move the bouncing ball. Jack, have you read? You've already read, haven't you? Megan. Oh, Sandra, you want to read? Do you feel comfortable? Great. Here you go.
Let's see if I can see it. Hold on. Ooh, wait a minute. It's really little. Hold on. I'm on my phone, so. All right. So, yeah, San Francisco. The enemy alien problem on the Pacific coast, or much more accurately, the fifth column problem, is very serious and it is very special. What makes it so, okay, wait a minute, makes it so serious is that so special, okay, I'll have to make it smaller, sorry, is that the Pacific coast is in imminent danger of a combined attack from within and from without. The danger is not as it would be in the inland centers, or perhaps even for okay, I mean, it's too small. You can have somebody else read it, Marcia.
Okay.
Sorry.
I'll read it. Even for the
Okay.
present on the Atlantic coast from sabotage alone. The peculiar danger of the Pacific coast is in a Japanese raid accompanied by an enemy action inside American territory. This combination can be very formidable indeed. For while the striking power of Japan from the sea and air might not in itself be overwhelming at any one point just now, Japan could strike a blow which might do irreparable damage if it were accompanied by the kind of organized sabotage to which this part of the country is especially vulnerable. This is a sober statement of the situation. In fact, a report based not on speculation, but on what is known to have taken place and is taking place in the area of war. It is a fact that the Japanese Navy has been reconnoitering in the Pacific coast more or less continually and for a considerable length of time, testing and feeling out American defenses. It is a fact. Whoops, I'm sorry. It is a fact that, hang on a second, I'm just gonna, I hope you guys are all following me. I'm just gonna make it shorter. It is a fact. What's a fact? I'm now just saying, This sober statement of the situation, in fact, a report based not on speculation, but is what is known as to have taken place and is taking place in this area of war. It is a fact that the Japanese Navy has been reconnoitering in the Pacific coast more and less continually and for a considerable length of time, testing and feeling out the American defenses. It is a fact that communication takes place between the enemy at sea and the enemy agents on land. These are facts which we shall ignore or minimize at our own peril. I mean, listen to this. This is really what was one of the worst chapters in American history. It is also a fact that since the outbreak of the Japanese War has, hang on a second, since the origins of the outbreak of the Japanese War, there has been no important sabotage in the Pacific coast. From what we know about Hawaii and about the fifth column in Europe, this is not, as some are like to have thought, a sign that there is nothing to be feared. It is a sign that the blow is well organized and that it is held back until it can be struck with maximum effect. In preparing to repel the attack, the Army and Navy have all the responsibility, but they are facing it with one hand tied down in Washington. I am sure, I understand fully the willingness of Washington to adopt a policy of mass evacuation and mass internment of all those who are technically enemy aliens. This is the assumption that if the rights of a citizen are abridged anywhere, they have been abridged everywhere. Forget for a moment all about the enemy aliens, dual citizenship, naturalized citizens, native citizens of enemy alien parentage, and consider the warship in San Francisco Harbor, an airplane plant in Los Angeles, a general's headquarters in Oshkosh, and an admiral's in Podunk. Then think of the lineal descendant. If there happened to be such a person of George Washington, the father of this country, and consider what happens to Mr. Washington if he would like to visit the warship or take a walk on the airplane plant or to drop in and photograph the general and admiral in their quarters. He is stopped by the sentry. He has to prove who he is. He has to prove that he has a good reason for doing what he wishes to do. He has to register, sign papers, and wear an identification button. Then perhaps, if he proves his case, he is escorted by an armed guard while he does his errand, and until he has been checked out of this place and his papers and his button have been returned. Have Mr. Washington's constitutional rights been abridged? Oh my gosh. So this, I mean, does anybody, talk to me about what you remember about the Americans and the Japanese and how we understood that relationship.
I think if I can, unless somebody else wants to speak,
Go ahead,
that the reaction to the Japanese in the West was far more severe than our reaction to the Germans on the East Coast and to many German groups who were very pro-Hitler and Nazis during the 30s. And so it seems to me that two things: we were attacked, and two, they were non-whites and we were afraid of them. It seems to me that our fear overwhelmed our judgment. And what we did to them basically was a very horrible thing, Shanda, as we would say. But they were not whites. And we were attacked. Our shores were attacked. Germany never got to the East Coast, although it tried.
Right. Obviously it took America a long time to realize that they basically punished an entire people for, a military, for the fact that we were, we were scared, and they became in many ways scapegoated. I want to hear what Neil says, and then I want to share this letter by Bill Clinton 50 years later. But go ahead, Neil.
My mom grew up in St. Paul, in the 30s and 40s, and she told stories of signs on St. Paul hotels saying no Jews, no blacks, and no dogs allowed. And I found out, interestingly enough, many years later, that she wasn't just making that up. This was, of course, the era of Henry Ford running the largest employer in St. Paul, the Ford Motor Plant, and Father Coughlin. And I heard about Coughlin's diatribes being put into the glove compartment of every new Ford. But the Jewish Community Relations Council in the synagogue, when I was visiting between congregations, had like a picture presentation of the history of the Twin Cities Jewry, and they had pictures of those very signs that my mom had grown up with in bucolic St. Paul.
Wow.
So I guess one reaction I have to that news article on the previous slide is we were on the receiving end of that. We were being marginalized simply because we were Jews, even though we didn't look different.
Absolutely. I mean, and again, I think that it's so fascinating what you share, and it's just amazing to think about. I'm trying to think like how I would feel if I saw but also I think that Sylvia's point that because they look different, it was easier to go for the jugular in that regard, as well. I'm very excited to hear what Sandra and Mickey have to share. Go ahead, Sandra.
Okay, thank you. So being from Detroit, it's well known in the Detroit area and in the country now that Henry Ford was a huge anti-Semite. And he contributed, him and Father Coughlin, who had a huge, the church is still there, beautiful church, contributed huge sums of money to Hitler. And that was a well-known fact in Detroit. And nobody, if you were Jewish, you didn't work at Ford. You didn't, I mean, he started his whole new city, Dearborn. There were no Jews that lived in Dearborn for many, 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 many years. And I mean, my father did work at Ford, but he could work a lathe. And he was tormented because he was Jew, but he stuck up for himself and nobody bothered him. But anyway, there were hardly any Jews that worked at Ford plant.
But by the way,
in those years,
I remember hearing that. I remember my mother saying no Jews in Dearborn. And this is like, when I was little in the 60s and 70s, what Scott noticed, he said the biggest Arab population in the world right now. One of them in the country is Dearborn. Yeah.
Well, I remember when our cousin Arthur married Julie, Mo, and her father was a big executive at Ford Motor. They learned the Hora, and the wedding was in Dearborn at his hotel, and we just were kidding about it because he must have been turning over in his grave that we're doing the Hora in Dearborn.
Well, and that she became Jewish, no less.
Well, she converted besides, right? So that was one thing, but this is not. I mean, people realize that this does not stop at a war. I mean, when I was, I'm going to say 1960. 58, 59, 60. So I was a stewardess for Northwest Airline. I was the only Jewish stewardess. I had people ask me how I got on the airline because there were no Jews unless you were a pilot or co-pilot. And I went, they didn't know until the last day, which I'd already graduated, had my uniform, all that. And I'll never forget, I love to tell the story that I was walking down because they were in the middle of strikes. And they asked what affiliations you had, and I couldn't think of anything but B'nai B'rith, which I really didn't belong to. Walking down the hallway with the instructor said to me, and I quote, "I never met anybody named Katz that was Jewish." And I said, "Gee, that's really funny. I never met anybody named Katz that wasn't." And I actually had a co-pilot out of Washington that said, "How did you get hired?" And they don't hire Jews. They didn't know because we had to wear the whole badge. So if anybody knew, Katz is a Jewish name. I love to tell that story. So yeah, a very anti-Semitic, a lot of anti-Semitism in Detroit.
Yeah. Thank you, Sandra. Mickey?
Well, I was just going to say, I grew up on the northwest coast of Oregon, and I do remember having blackouts because the Japanese were patrolling off our coast, and there was actually a place not very far from us, maybe 20, 25 miles, where they did shoot some bombs or cannons or something onto the beach area. But I don't remember, now I was pretty little, but I don't remember any overt anti-Asian feelings. I mean, there were few Asians, not very many in our area, not like in California. But I do remember the term, the inscrutable Oriental. And I wonder if it comes from that era. I don't know.
I would be surprised if it didn't, and the whole idea of, and then again, you can imagine extending that fear to, all people of Asian descent. I mean, it's just so easy to have that grow. And, we saw what happened with COVID. I mean, oh my God. I mean, and with ignorance. I mean, that's something that's actually happened that belies this whole curriculum.
Exactly.
But thank you for sharing that, Mickey, because that's distinctive because you were a West Coaster.
Right.
I want to
use in that area.
Right. Well, so let's look at this letter from Bill Clinton. Scott pointed out to me, by the way, that it was in 1988 in the Reagan administration that he issued the Civil Liberties Act of 1988 and America. Not that it was, it was a pittance, gave $20,000 cash to each person that was incarcerated in that program. But it was 5 years later that Clinton wrote this letter to everybody who was still surviving. October 1st, 1993, over 50 years ago, the United States government unjustly interned, evacuated, or relocated you and many other Japanese Americans. Today, on behalf of your fellow Americans, I offer a sincere apology to you for the actions.
Hanging on back of the chair, back of the door.
Hang on, so you're on. You're not on mute, Sandra.
Sorry.
I offer a sincere apology to you for the actions that unfairly denied Japanese Americans and their families fundamental liberties during World War II. In passing the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, we acknowledge the wrongs of the past and offer redress to those who endured such grave injustice. In retrospect, we understand that a nation's actions were rooted deeply in racial prejudice, wartime hysteria, and a lack of political leadership. We must learn from the past and dedicate ourselves as a nation to renewing the spirit of equality and our love of freedom. Together, we can guarantee a future with liberty and justice for all. You and your family have my best wishes for the future. Oi. Oi. But before we close, I just wanted to, I wanted to, again, in this curriculum, which is so sensitively done, even though the examples that we're looking at, both in biblical times and in ancient times, and then even, during World War II, that there were times where there would have been good reason for a country to be worried about an internal group who are aligned with another nationalistic program. So I'm wondering, somebody who maybe hasn't read, is there Donna, would you be willing to read this for us?
Sure.
So this is Fears of the Sudeten Germans in Czechoslovakia in the 30s. This is a statement from Sidney Alderman, trial counsel for the United States at the Nuremberg trial proceedings. And so
1940. May I say one sentence?
Please, yes, please.
Previous talk, I wanted to say, I turned 1 year old in West Los Angeles, California, after Pearl Harbor. So my family was very much a part of the ordinary people. And my first 5 years of life were rations and just living with the awareness of the war. My two uncles joined the Navy and Army right away. And it was, I mean, I have so much that I love to share, but at another time. Anyway, I remember that we did not think about being, we were not afraid. I remember that my family tried to just be very patriotic. That's all I can say. We really loved America in California.
I'm sure people loved America all over America. And it was really, and very few people in America understood that it was not a mistake, that it really was a mistake that we didn't intervene to blow up the railroad tracks, to just reduce the mass killing that were happening. People didn't, there were some people who knew, but not many. And it was lingering anti-Semitism in high circles that really convinced our leadership that would have been a bad idea. And, even if they could have saved 300,000 lives and only, 5.7 million had died instead of 6, that could have been huge. But anyway, will you read this for us? This is really interesting.
Yes. Okay, it was a little bigger before.
Yes, I'll do my best. Hang on.
All right. Okay. While building up the SS as a military force within Germany, the conspirators also utilized it in other countries to lay the groundwork for aggression. The same pattern was repeated in Czechoslovakia. Maybe you could make it a little smaller. It's really hard to do it this way.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, whoops. Okay. So Heinlein's Free Corps.
Okay. Heinlein's Free Corps played in that country the part of fifth column, which the Austrian SS had played in Austria. And it was rewarded by being placed under the jurisdiction of the Reichsführer SS in September 1938. The SS had its own armed unit, 4 battalions of the Totenkopfverband, actually operating in Czechoslovakia before the Munich Pact was signed. SS preparations for aggression in Czechoslovakia were not confined to military forces. One of the departments of the SS Supreme Command in Volksdeutsch Mittelstelle was a center for fifth column activity. The tribunal may recall the secret meeting between Hitler and Heinlein in March 1938, described in notes of the German Foreign Office, at which time the line to be followed by the Sudeten German Party was determined. The Volksdeutsch Ministell was represented at that meeting by Professor Hausschlafer and SS Obergruppenführer Lodenz.
Oh my God, this is so hard. You're doing such a good job. Keep going. You were almost done.
And when the Foreign Office in August 1938 awarded further subsidies to Heinlein's Sudeten Party, the memorandum of that recommendation for further subsidies contained the significant footnote: Volksdeutsch Ministelle will be informed. When at last the time came to strike, the SS was ready.
So I know that was a lot of German and probably not so easy to say, but basically, to sum this up, 1/4 of the population in the Democratic Republic of Czechoslovakia was ethnically German, and they set everything up to make it possible for the Germans to basically walk in there. So that in that case, that's an example where, were they to be afraid of the Germans, it was with the German people living in their country, it would have been with good reason. That would have been, that was a cause for national security, not xenophobia. That's the whole idea of, this curriculum. So I just want to, there's so much to say. And again, I I want to hear what my dad has to say, but I'll just say that one of the experiences that I've had, that, well, not me, not I, all of us have seen really in the last 7 years is, and this might have been in the McCarthy era too, which was before my time, but to just see how you can just rile up a community with no basis. It's stunning. And so Dad, you and then Sheila, and then we'll have a closing word. And thank you so much for coming. The next one of these, by the way, is going to be 4 weeks from today in March. Daddy, go ahead.
I was 15 when Pearl Harbor Day came, and very much in tune with world affairs. First of all, I would want to indicate that the Japanese in the United States really represented, Walter Lippmann notwithstanding, no threat whatsoever. They were harmless, they were small, they were ineffective. I don't think there was any evidence that they were organized in any way. But what did happen for the next 3-4 years was that the newspapers, the newsreels were inundated with demonizing Japanese people. And all we could see was evil and horrible things in anybody who looked like they were Japanese. The power of propaganda.
Dad, absolutely. So you've seen it many times in your lifetime, and it must make you sick to your stomach, truly. Sheila.
Thank you. The historian in me gets very emotional about this. Also, it makes me emotional is hearing you say daddy. I haven't used that word in over 40 years, and just to hear you say, okay, daddy, just made me really happy. Anyway, because it wasn't bad enough what we did to the Japanese is, first off, the worst camp was called Heart Mountain in Montana, which made no sense because in that first article, it talked about the oceans. And I just don't know what ocean is near Montana. And the reason people were sent there is that because they had to, the people being interned is, first of all, they had to make 2 statements, and they had to answer yes, yes. One is, are you a US citizen? And 2 was, do you denounce your heritage? And there were people who were like, yes, I'm a US citizen, but I'm not going to deny my family and my ancestry from Japan. And so if they didn't say yes, yes to the questions, that if they said yes, no, then they were sent to Heart Mountain under the most rash conditions. And 7 young men who were at Heart Mountain were drafted to go serve in the army, and they refused to go. And then they were put on trial for treason. So here they were stripped of every civil right they have. And then they were duly punished because they refused to go serve under the conditions. Like, how, I don't even know how, well, I've said this 100,000 times since 2015, who sits around and thinks of this stuff? Who thinks? I don't get it. It's so, it was just really, really, and it broke up families because they would beg each other, please just say yes, yes. And there were people like, I can't do that. I cannot denounce my family, my heritage, my identity. So I think that the United States government, I mean, if it weren't bad enough that we exacerbated it to the worst, it could be.
Thank you, Sheila. I want to just, Sylvia, I'm gonna have to end this now, but I want to say that I will share the whole source sheet. There's more. This is a great curriculum. Next month, we're going to be talking about, and actually I'll send you, I'll send everybody the recordings of the 4 classes until now, but I will also just say the next one is dealing with people and their land. It's going to be really meaningful and heartbreaking. It's the title is A Land for a People and a People for a Land. And there's you know, you can only imagine where that's going to go, and other examples in the world. But thank you so much today for studying with me. It was an honor, and I learned a lot in preparing these materials. And Jack, it's always great to have Neil here and Jack here, two of my esteemed colleagues, and always my father, and all of you. Megan, you were quiet today, but I hope you were listening. You too, Corrine, and thank you for everybody for sharing. And Edie, I hope you were listening. Eleanor, Gloria, Diane, thank you. Have a good
you.
one.
It was really interesting.
Fascinating.